Welcome to Voices in Action, a new podcast by the Eastern Oregon Center for Independent Living about disability in Oregon. I'm your host, Leo Alenak. Over the course of this first season, we'll cover a variety of topics related to disability justice education, speak with leaders of local advocacy organizations, and learn from one another in the process. This week, we'll be discussing one way of creating space for disabled people and disability advocacy: grassroots organizations. Many people outside of major cities are isolated from resources crucial to their survival and support systems. In Oregon especially, those on the coast, in Eastern Oregon, or simply outside of Portland, struggle to find networks of community, and thus must create them themselves. In this episode, recorded back in April, I interviewed two disability advocacy community leaders, one from Corvallis, the other from the coast. First, I spoke with Julie Chick of Sammy's Place and the Oregon Coast Network.
Yeah, my name is Julie Chick, and I am a parent that lives out on the Oregon coast.
What is your affiliation with Sammy's Place?
At this point in time, I am a volunteer president of the board of Sammy's Place, which is a Oregon 501c3 nonprofit.
What exactly is Sammy's Place? Could you speak a little bit more about the work that you and others within the organization do with Sammy's Place?
Yeah, certainly. So Sammy's Place, at this time, the mission is to create community choices through nature-inspired living, working, and respite opportunities with people experiencing disability and those who share their journey. When Sammy's Place started in 2006, the mission was really wrapped around respite for individuals and our families and caregivers for people experiencing what we call IDD, intellectual and or developmental disabilities. In 2014, we expanded the mission to include living and working so that we would have whole life considered in our mission for a person and or their family, friends, and caretakers. So in about 2014, we did some fundraising to see what our community looked like out here on the Oregon coast, and we garnered a lot of support in and around two thoughts for the nonprofit, and that was to create programs that were accessible by families and individuals with disability, and to create housing, more housing, and to really create a spot at the table in that affordable housing project for people specifically with disabilities. Because what we have learned is too often, even in affordable housing projects, there is a small contingent of people, especially people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, that get bypassed when independent housing opportunities come along. So really that housing piece is to carve out an intentional space at the table so that people experiencing IDD can think about independent living, whether that's home ownership or rental. There's just not enough for everybody. And if you're a vulnerable population that does not have access to those conversations out here on the coast, you very well may be bypassed again. I am a parent of two boys. They're 14 and 16 years old. My oldest son experiences Down syndrome, and at the age 8 years old, I realized I needed to think about his housing when he turned 18, because it was clear to me he was going to have a very independent streak, as he does now at 16. And his choices are limited. So we were working with a group of people who were willing to expand the mission, and here we are.
So it's this housing program sounds great, because I completely agree and know about the issue of accessible from a disability standpoint, and accessible from a money standpoint, affordable.
Right.
So is this housing project currently just centered on the coast, or are you guys looking to expand or working with other organizations within Oregon?
Well, so it's interesting you ask. We acquired a 3-acre parcel in 2018 here in the urban growth boundary of Nehalem. Nehalem's due west of Portland, about 2 hours. And what we did not realize is that maybe our naivete in and around affordable housing was a good thing, because perhaps had we known the barriers and layers of inaccessibility to create affordable housing, we may not have done this, but we are well deep in it now. We have a 3-acre parcel, and what needed to happen on that parcel was some true and real feasibility studies for housing, while the zoning is looking outright and allowed. The land itself has some uniqueness to it, and we're pretty excited about that ultimately. It's got 2 perennial streams on it. It's got a little tiny piece of wetlands on it, and it's also got, it butts up against the city park, which is a steep 200-foot hillside. So there were some surveys we had to do and are doing. And there was a huge, massive environmental cleanup, and we are just finishing that, working with the DEQ and the EPA. So the project has not moved along near as quick as we had hoped, but the support we've got from both the city, the county, and the state has been amazing, and we hope to keep those partnerships so that we can work through this process and actually get units down there. We're to the point now where we can start talking about visioning on paper. We know where the wetlands are. We know what the geotech survey looks like. We've got to talk about what public works and what the services will actually be able to service, the water, fire. So the dream's still a little ways off. And as far as working with the rest of the state, I think we'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
What we do know is the coast of Oregon is often referred to in the Oregon disability community as resource desert.
Yeah.
But that's the truth. My son has really one option that's a supported option for living and working, and we're really trying to change that. We're trying to change that through job coaches, through, like I said, being able to even access the opportunities like his peers. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do, and our board is small. We are challenged out here on the coast by the rural population game of low numbers of people. The disability community, as we all know, is small, and the disability community tends to be, while they're very engaged, they're also quite overloaded.
Yes.
Not only with perhaps their own disability, but just the system can be quite arduous to get through, and so extra time and involvement in volunteer projects is not always the highest priority, unfortunately. It's our work to start to change the leadership's perception and understanding what it means to intentionally make sure that families and individuals with disability are included in the original decision-making and the opportunities at the end of those decisions.
Yeah, you bring up some great points because, I think, this is true of all marginalized communities, but there's something to be said for the specific issue of the amount of time and energy that has to go in self-advocacy and fighting against the system for, basic access and, access to health care and whatnot. And then you add in the fact of it can be very isolating if we don't start, moving forward in creating those connections. So how has it been navigating COVID? How has kind of daily work with Sammy's Place been affected by COVID?
So right now, our work has primarily been the last couple years on this property. So fortunately, COVID has affected our work minimally. I wouldn't say not at all. I mean, obviously, the kids are following school protocols through our Oregon Coast Network, and Coast is spelled COAAST, and that stands for Communities of All Abilities Succeeding Together. We've created that about a year and a half ago so that we could all stay in touch up and down the coast, especially the top 3 counties. That's been a nice way to stay in touch and create a bigger vision of the region, if you will.
Yeah.
Zoom has been fantastic for that. I think that's a blessing that perhaps everybody needed to see, because it was so hard to get to meetings. For me, it's an hour drive either direction, especially if there's summer traffic, it can be more, to access meetings. And when we would ask for remote access, we were often denied. So that means if you can't make it in here, you can't participate. And I think that those days are well behind us, and that's pretty exciting.
So you mentioned you said that you guys were working on the housing element, which is great, and then a few other programs. What other programs do those include?
So the program is essentially the Oregon Coast Network, and we just developed that within the last year and a half. And that's really to tie families and individuals together on the coast and give a coastal representation, first for ourselves, and then for the state to see that, hey, we are out here. Because what I was finding is I would go over to Portland, Salem Valley region, and, I'd have maybe one person that knew about the coast, but oftentimes it was underrepresented. So we just went, well, we need to form so that we can be visual and let the information come in and go out both directions. So within the coastal network, I'm going to be honest, COVID has really slowed things down, and people are fragile right now, and I am a big believer in taking time. It may be why I personally ended up out at the coast in the first place, because it's a little slower pace. We have a lot of outdoor opportunities for health and mental health and recovery, which is really beneficial. What we did start up was unified golf. In the fall, we are trying to get some of the high school kids outside where they could social distance, get a little exercise, and then the parents could have some time together while the kids played golf. And that was so successful in the fall that we have struck up another 6 weeks here this spring, and that's on Wednesdays. So that's something we're pretty excited about.
What has been your favorite part about the Coastal Network / Sammy's Place? Like, what is your favorite either element that you've got to experience yourself or something that you've organized?
There's a lot, actually.
Yeah.
In and around the Coast Network, it really is, for me personally, being able to talk to other parents in the same situation. There's not a lot that has to be described or defined, but there's an understanding, not only what it's like to have a child with a disability, which is not the hard part. It's really connecting each other to resources, supports. Right now, not only the coast, but all of Oregon struggling with finding supports for our kids outside of school, because we're all home, and the direct support providers and or personal support workers are few and far between right now. So it's really taking care of each other. That's been a huge thing for me and my peer friends. Also, to be able to share this vision of housing in a neighborhood that I would call 95% supportive, but the 5% came out and they said some things that were just, downright hurtful. And it really opened our eyes that out here at the coast, we are not immune to the insensitive thinking, the biases, the systemic ableist thinking. It might even be privileged. What it has made us realize is, especially our board, who is really open to learning, it's made us realize our BIPOC friends and community are the generations of what we're talking about in the bias and the systemic racism. It's really profound. It's opened my eyes, and that's what the disability community and the non-acceptance has opened my eyes to, and our boards as well. We were shocked and startled at first, and then we went, okay, well, Little Nehalem and the luxury, wonderful coast that we all love is not immune to what goes on in the larger world of non-acceptance.
I don't know if this is something that is kind of currently a focus for you guys, but do you have either, not a program specifically, but do you spend time then advocating in terms of dealing with people kind of outside of the internal the disability community and educating them, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. In fact, I personally walk the razor's edge on that one, and I have to check in with the board all the time, and the board has wholeheartedly supported activism, advocacy as number one priority, especially out here. We have a couple of organizations that have kept the blinders on, and we are knee-deep in the conversations that are hard and messy and lots of pushback, and some people are seeing it, and it's so fun to watch when people go, aha. But unfortunately, leadership is still in place that is fighting what I would call a status quo, old school way. It's kind of the beauty and the curse of the coast. You know, the laid back old school vibe really does, I don't know if I want to say
That's
the truth too, Leo. Is it's scary to stand up and say it, because out here we're in a fishbowl. It can be detrimental to my future profession, work opportunities. You just never know. I mean, I think it's that way everywhere. And when a community is as tiny as we are all in it together. So it has to be carefully weighed and walked so that it is successful in the end.
No, absolutely. It's that very delicate balance of understanding that in order to survive, you do have to risk a lot, but then also understanding that, you know, you can only risk so much, because it is a very dangerous, you know, advocating and educating is a very dangerous path to take in small areas like that. I empathize deeply because, you know, my hometown, very small, very, very deeply conservative. And it is, you know, the danger of pushing back against that is very prevalent. It is, so it is definitely something to be cognizant of. But at the same time, you know, you're also advocating for yourself and others' right to live and survive and thrive, and so it is that necessary balance that's very, very difficult to take on. So what is something that you wish people knew about Sammy's Place or the Coastal Network and the work that you guys do?
Sammy's Place has a really beautiful vision. Sammy's Place has this vision, especially with what we call the Thompson Road property, of co-housing. We also call it mixed co-housing, meaning we would like it to be as diverse as possible. It will be small because the space is small, the neighborhood's small, and it would be inappropriate to build something out of context, and we understand and appreciate that. We've tried to truly embrace the environment and the property and the area that we live in, which is the Nehalem River, the Nehalem Bay, the ocean, all of those things that make us happy and healthy, we want to embrace within the project. We see a communal living space, hopefully, and some small units that can be independent and private within gardens and pathways. And we are here to make sure that everyone has an opportunity, and not just the disability community either. People with disabilities want to live alongside everybody, not in a segregated spot, not isolated, and they want the same chances as everybody. And we really see it being quite harmonious with the little area that we live in and all the things that we love and do here. Yeah, we aren't out to create problems. I think that there's probably some people in the neighborhood that think that, because we are not going to stand in silence when we see injustice, but we are really only here to speak up for those that can't or won't because they're scared. I just really get excited about the vision, what can be, and housing out at the coast. We need attainable housing for our workforce, for our marginalized communities, for everybody.
So how can either individuals or organizations support and help the work that you all are doing?
So they can reach out to us via our website, which is sammysplace.info, all lowercase. we would always take people volunteering, whether that's working online, social media work. We also have and will have more opportunities on site as we go forward, and we will be doing some garden work, replanting of invasives to native plants with a nice plant plan. Certainly we take donations, and that can be accessed via our website. And if anybody ever wants to hear more or wants a tour and to hear more of the vision, we also have tours that go on, and those can be COVID safe in private pods of common groups, and it's really the land that speaks to the vision. I was told by a local that land is land is land. Just tell me what you're developing. And we said, well, no, actually, this land is special, and you have to come and feel that. That's an open invitation as well.
Anything else that you would like listeners to know?
I just finished up a grant to bring out Keith Jones. I don't know if you know who that is.
I don't.
He's a national disability advocate. He uses a chair. He's Black. He has CP, and he's fantastic. And hopefully we can bring him out to the coast and do some community outreach and awareness. So I'm excited about that. And that's the kind of stuff I try to do, is something a little bit bigger bang for the buck, because we don't have a lot of people out here that can manage programs like boots on the ground programs. So I'm trying to build the community, if you will, from the ground up. So I worked for FACT Oregon for several years just before COVID hit, and I went to work over there, and I was their coastal program coordinator. And what we learned is the coastal thinking. I would tell the director this all the time. I would say, our thinking over there is 20 years behind what you're doing over here, and what you're trying to ask me to do over on the coast isn't jiving because they don't understand. So I got to back up and tell the stories and get them to listen, and that's really where we're at. We're in an awareness phase right now, and that's so nebulous to mark down as goals and count the data, because it really takes people turning their head and listening to the story. And so it's got to be done so many different ways to get it out there. And some ways haven't been pretty, quite frankly. People that don't want to hear it. And I think they think that we're some sort of rebels, but the truth is we're just trying to play catch up as an organization to where you all are.
It is so hard to tell where communities are at when you're not a part of that community, you know,
Right.
You make a great point about understanding, like, okay, well, we know that, generally speaking, this specific community is, and I think you put it very well in terms of like the educational phase, like phase one of like, okay, we have to do like basic groundwork, and you're right. It is the rough, really frustrating work, that is very hard to see tangibly. It's not as, again, simple is a relative term here, but saying, okay, we're going to build this building and we can see it grow, we can see it completed. So it is really good to know that is the kind of stage that the coastal community is in, because that's helpful in terms of figuring out how best to help you guys, help the work that you are doing, and figure out what kind of resources are needed and whatnot. And I think getting, speakers and whatnot is great, especially disabled speakers of color, because Oregon is very white and suffers greatly because of it. And so, there is a lot, in terms of that intersectionality of, we have to unpack ableism, and if we're going to unpack ableism, we also have to unpack racism, and that's not a simple thing to do. So
that is very uncomfortable out here. We have some organizations leading the way and some equity DEIA work going on here and there, but there's tons of pushback, and then you get down to the grassroots of just good old-fashioned community members, and for the most part, it's risky.
Yeah.
And I hate saying it like that because it's unfair. It's just downright unfair and not right.
It's so important to at least know that other people are listening and supporting. If we can't be there in person to support, it is helpful and reassuring to know that you have supporters across the state, especially in such isolated areas.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That kind of goes back to you asked, what can people do to help us? And that's probably one of the biggest things we need right now is just the support and acknowledgement that we are a 501c3 of grassroots individuals that could really use just the moral support, maybe the letters of support, the word of mouth when it comes to grants, applications, funding, just saying, no, these guys are legitimate. Just because they're small does not mean they don't pack a punch.
No, absolutely. I mean, the smallest, the grassroots organizations I have found are the most powerful because, you have the most at stake. And so you are always the ones at the front lines. And I think that should definitely be respected and elevated.
Yeah, I would always take feedback, growth, offering, edits, whatever from anybody. If somebody says, oh, you're missing the point here, let us know so that we can grow and get there because, we need the partnerships and the help from those looking in.
Next, I spoke with Dr. Allison Hobgood of the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center and the Disability Equity Center.
My name is Allison Hobgood, and I use she, her pronouns. And I, for folks who are listening who might like a visual description, I don't mind. I'm a white woman in my mid-40s, and I've got a short hair, dyed blonde faux hawk, and I'm in my home office. I'm in Corvallis, Oregon. I'm not at work right now, but I'm at home in my office in a kind of brownish room with lots of colorful paintings. I used to be a professor at Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, and I taught English literature, disability studies, and also women's and gender studies. And I did that for about 12 or 13 years. And now I work in Grassroots nonprofit, and you'll hear more about that here in a second. And I work as the executive director of a place called the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center. And I'm also on the board of a new organization that we're going to talk about that I'm excited to share with folks too, called the Disability Equity Center.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center is? Sure.
So the Drop-In Center, also known as CDDC, Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center, is a daytime community resource hub for people who are experiencing chronic poverty. And we basically are a very, very low barrier, harm reduction focused grassroots organization that helps folks who often are experiencing generational chronic poverty, majority of whom are unhoused or unsheltered in some way, and also have, 75% of our folks I self-identify as people with disabilities, diverse disabilities, a lot of mental health disabilities in our community, and then also folks who are experiencing substance abuse disorders too. So that's kind of the big picture. A little more nitty gritty, the Drop-In Center, we're open Monday through Friday from 9 until 2. And from 9 to 12, people can come to the Drop-In Center. We're on 4th Street, right downtown in Corvallis. And you can come to the Drop-In Center and you can be in community, a safe community, non-judgmental community, and you can have your basic needs met. So we've got everything from hygiene items to clothing to food. And so we really try and meet people where they are, help them with next steps. A lot of what we do, and this is particularly true when we sort of close our doors at 12 o'clock, we have a sort of an after hours from 12 to 2 where we're hooking up folks up directly with service providers. So we've got a network of other community-based organizations who are partners. We've got a couple counselors who support folks in really kind of non-traditional ways when we're talking about counseling, and that could be a whole nother conversation. And we've got a couple of community partners who have loaned sort of caseworkers to us because we have a lot of the same folks. So people can see a case manager and talk about goals and next steps, whether you've lost your identification or you need to apply for SSDI or you name it. And we have an in-house needs navigator who also helps with that. And then we've got connections with some nurses who come down to help with OHP and appointment making and finding primary care physicians. So it's a wonderful melange of this kind of really, really front door walk in, you need a pair of pants, here you go. But also, by the way, we can plug you into a support system that you may not even know exists, right? And that ideally, can help you take steps in all kinds of directions, but for a lot of folks too, toward affordable housing and getting inside.
I know some drop-in centers in Salem, that's kind of my point of reference, also offer overnight like shelters. Is there a spot in Corvo that you work with that also offers that?
Yeah, so we are strictly day, and we're really unique in that way because we really are more of a kind of, in other places we're seeing this now too, we're more of a navigation hub, but we do partner really closely with Unity Shelter, and Unity Shelter is an umbrella organization that is a conglomeration of a women's shelter called the Room at the Inn, the Corvallis Men's Cold Weather Shelter, which right now is staying open beyond cold weather, which is great news. And then some other partners who are Corvallis Housing First and some other folks who are working not on emergency crisis sheltering, but on permanent supportive housing. So scenarios for people to move into congregate living settings when they're ready and moving beyond something like an overnight shelter or even a micro shelter and into a more kind of community supported living scenario.
So how has the work that you've been doing for CDDC, I gotta get that right, changed during COVID?
Well, I mean, it's been an interesting journey because I basically quit academia. I quit higher ed right kind of when this all happened. I was finishing some online teaching and saying goodbye to my students, and then just went boots on the ground at the drop-in center. And the main way that it's changed, and so in other words, it's changed, but for me, this is all I've ever known, I guess is sort of what I'm getting at, is the COVID version of things, really. But the biggest COVID bummer is that we are, a major goal of ours is about community and socialization and decreasing isolation and bringing people together and creating purposefulness and, community advocacy. And when you can't even have people in a building, that's like real hard to do. So all our services have been happening kind of through a walk-up window and like on the side yard and out back on our parking pad area. So we've been open, but it's only volunteers who have been inside the building. And then there are folks like me and others, but who are working frontline with, our guests outside. And then occasionally, in these after hour slots, what we had going at the beginning, we just didn't have people in the building. As things got a little bit more relaxed, we were able to bring all of our service providers back and have people come in socially distant ways, make sure you're 6 feet apart, come inside, wear your mask, take your temperature. And so, it's been a real trial. That said, I'm so humbled by both the guests and our volunteers and our staff who have persevered through this and just done an incredible job continuing to connect people with what they need, whether that's really sort of most fundamental basic need, food, or, again, springboarding them on a journey, for whatever else, other kinds of supports they need, from mental health to housing to you name it.
Switching over then, can you talk a little bit about the Disability Equity Center?
Sure. So when I decided I was going to retire from higher ed, I kind of was mulling on a dream that I had had for a while that actually is based out of a more kind of higher ed model. So, on campuses, there will be centers, pride centers, cultural centers that are focused around a particular identity group. So I was thinking, what would it look like to create essentially a disability pride and culture center, but for the community, like in the community, and for the Mid-Willamette Valley, or I don't know, whoever the hell wants to come. So I met, I guess was more like it, a colleague who had a similar vision. And so we, in fall of 19, I guess that would have been, we started just doing some grassroots organizing around Corvallis and a little beyond, Monmouth, and asking people like, what do you think about disability justice and what do we want to do about it, and what are the gaps and what are the needs? And so basically what evolved out of those community conversations with stakeholders, many of whom were people with disabilities, but also allies and service providers and family. And what evolved was what we now call the DEC, Disability Equity Center. And it is, at this point, we are actually a 501c3. So we were able, over the course of COVID, somehow miraculously, to still be able to get 501c3 status, which not everybody needs to be a nonprofit, but it's a really great way to be able to access grant funding. So we want to keep our deep commitment to grassroots-ness and like community organizing vibe, but we are an official 501c3. But the purpose of DEC is kind of threefold. It's to be a pride and cultural center. It's a place where people can say, I claim disability identity, or I don't, but I might want to, and can we talk about it, right? And enhance culture and pride around disability. So that's part one. Part two is it's a not unlike the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center, but in its own way, it's a network and navigational resource hub. So like, what's out there? What can I access? How can I find it? Right? Where are my people? Where are my services? And so that resource navigation piece in terms of direct service, I think, is really important. And then thirdly, community education and outreach. So what is ableism? Why does it suck? How can we change it? What is the medical industrial complex? How can we make interventions into these things that we take for granted and assume are, quote, normal, that are really, really toxic and oppressive? And I'll just say this now because I want to give them a shout out too, that one of the cool things that has happened in the last month plus-ish is that we had been building this disability equity center that now has a community stakeholder base of about 150 people, which is pretty cool. It's not brick and mortar. I can say more about that later, but not right now. But we've got this online presence and we've got online events and classes, but we, through wonderful universe alignment, ran into some folks called the Grateful Moth Collective, and they are a crew of folks, disability self-advocates, and also allies and friends and service providers who had kind of like a similar idea. And so now we're bringing the Grateful Moths together with the Disability Equity Center. And I think some really wonderful things are going to come of that collaboration too. So it's been a really, really collaborative project, and so many cool bridges, I think, have been built already just in this first sort of COVID wreck of a year of trying to continue to make things happen.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you mainly communicate with the larger network? Do you guys communicate over, over email, over like Facebook? Like, what's the main way to connect with you guys?
Yeah, great question, Leo. It's a combo. I mean, the majority of our kind of wellness classes and events and stuff like that are Zoom or Google Meets based. We send out a weekly like news and events and updates, which ranges everything from like, hey, don't forget, know your rights, COVID shots, et cetera, to like, hey, here's a cool podcast on disability. Maybe you didn't know about it. These are events coming up in the community, I don't know, in collaboration with NAACP that we should check out. So it just kind of gives people both points of connection and some justice roads in, like where do you want to plug in beyond also, if you can, beyond just sort of very specific supports for folks with certain kinds of disabilities, as those come up. So, as folks in this network have gotten to know one another, some people are like, I don't email, so only call me. Or, hey, can we just text or voice text? Or so there's, as is always the case in disability community, people are really attuned to accommodation and what your points of access are. So that doesn't work for me. Let's do it this way. So there's a lot of like back channel cool communication happening too, Sometimes you just got to knock on somebody's door and stand 6 feet away and be like, hey, did you hear about this?
Yeah, that's the very fun thing I've found about the disability community. It's very underground in a way that, kind of speaks to the problematic element of disability being marginalized and kind of made invisible. But then also in terms of, to your point about accessibility, communicating with people in different ways means that it can kind of seem like it's very behind the scenes, if that makes sense. But, that communication is happening.
No, I agree. And that's sort of what I meant about wanting to be able to keep that kind of like cool crypt justice, like behind the scenes vibe, even as you're really making things open to more people. Absolutely. And they're thereby inevitably more transparent, but at the very least more structured. Mutual aid networks are awesome, but particularly mutual aid networks with people with disabilities, like they're really complicated too, because maybe today I'm just like too sick to do the thing I was supposed to do to help you. And so how we can really just amplify, I guess, right, those existing practices and networks and make sure that nobody gets lost in the, or, as best we can, nobody gets lost in the shuffle.
Right. Yeah. So kind of speaking on that, then what has been your biggest struggle advocating for disability justice in Corvallis?
Yeah, I thought this was such a cool question. I have like a bunch of different, maybe related responses. I hope people hear this as super loving, but also candid. And I'm speaking now both from the perspective of my work with the Daytime Drop-In Center and also the Equity Center, the Disability Equity Center, Corvallis is a lovely, lovely place. And there is a lot of, I think, useful, whatever we want to call it, progressivism or liberalism here. But I have found, and this is the case beyond somewhere like Corvallis, that folks who are not disabled, for example, are pretty okay with what in academic circles or other places people describe as like well disabled. So like, I feel comfortable, like I understand you in the way that you speak, let's say, or I see you using an assisted device that makes sense to me. But the minute that I feel like where I get the most pushback from people who even sort of claim to be in on the project is with folks who are not well disabled or sick disabled and maybe like wandering the street voice hearers, for example, right? And there's not enough generosity, I think, around the really challenging and diverse experiences that people are having every single day, all the time, and how to hold space for the wide array of disability experience as people are trying to be advocates. So that was kind of one thing that I thought of. So that's more of a like culture change, like what would it really mean to be like, yeah, like disability justice at all levels for all people, right? So there's that. There's also the frustration, I'm circling back around to the drop-in center being sort of closed as a community hub. So you can't come inside. You can still stand outside and drink your coffee and smoke a cigarette or talk to somebody, but like, it's not the same as being invited into a space of hospitality, especially when, and it was like a double down in COVID, when you're literally invited into zero spaces anywhere ever, right? Actively marginalized from those spaces. So that has been a real struggle, but things are opening up a little bit. I feel like we've got like a Euro indoor outdoor vibe going on right now. That's pretty good. Another challenge has been the kind of connection and outreach for the Disability Equity Center, because we're not brick and mortar. It's hard to, I'm imagining it's harder to kind of coordinate and figure out where people are. And then even when we're working with organizations, let's say, who are connecting us to folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities living in a group home. Well, it was COVID. Like you can't even go to the places where people are and say, hey, what do you need? How could we, connect up here? How can we support each other? And so there's not a brick and mortar locus where somebody could read a sign or say, hey, go there, right? And then there's this online presence, which is wonderful and actually more accessible in certain ways, but has made it extremely challenging for people who don't have access to technology, don't do tech, or that would really benefit from the deck coming to them, right? As opposed to them coming to the deck. So
are you from Corvallis? Did you grow up in Corvallis or did you move recently?
Yeah, so I did not grow, I'm an East Coaster. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but I was living in Atlanta for about a decade. I did my PhD at Emory University, so I was there. And then that was till 2008. And then I moved here in 2008 to take my position at Willamette.
It's definitely interesting. And this only, my personal experience speaks to Silverton specifically, but it is very interesting talking with people about politics, people who have recently moved here versus people who grew up here, just because I think it's very interesting so far, the people who have moved in who tend to be more progressive, generally speaking, generally younger parents are like, we're moving to like a small, quaint little town. And I've had so many conversations where they're so surprised by the politics. I'm like, we're not in Portland. We're not. Like, it's a very, very different world outside of Portland, and you are in rural Oregon.
When I first moved, I was kind of surprised. I mean, my partner came home from work the one day and was like, there was a lot of people talking about their guns. Didn't we leave the Deep South? Like, what's going on?
That was the funniest thing about going to school in LA, is I would talk about my hometown and everybody's like, oh, you're from like the Deep South. I'm like, no, I'm from Oregon. Like, I'm from north of here, actually.
It's interesting. And like I said, even with the kind of bastion of liberalism that is Oregon State, or being in a small college town, it's just, sometimes you're just not getting traction when really push comes to shove. And they're really sticky, difficult justice issues, but it's about justice, period.
Right. The problem is everybody's very comfortable here. And I think that as a general, people generally who are not marginalized are very comfortable in Oregon as a whole. And that kind of ties into what you were saying about almost needing to deal with the respectability politics element of saying that, disability extends past like, oh, using a wheelchair in a way that makes sense to me. And it's like, I've seen that on TV. So that's the extent of disability and that's the extent of my understanding. And it is very much based on how, quote unquote, like pretty you can make it. So, and that's just not, to your point, it's just not what disability justice is. It isn't what justice as a whole is, period. And so that's a much harder concept to grasp, because then you have to talk about, capitalism and colonization and all this other stuff. So
it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot for people, but it's all part of the project.
Yeah. It kind of, it ties into that kind of American culture of just like real talking, like perfectly comfortable with violence, not at all comfortable talking about, our actual human bodies as, in the various ways that they come. So what has been, conversely then, what has been your biggest success in advocating for disability justice in Corvo?
Well, like I said, I'm pretty stoked, and hats off to all of the amazing people who I've been working with who are making this happen. But that, COVID didn't start and the whole Disability Equity Center thing just crumbled. It could have, but it has blossomed still, even in this kind of grassrootsy online virtual space that we've created it. And so that we at this point, have grant funding. Huge shout out to the Delivery Systems Transformation team at Samaritan Hospital. They have, for many reasons, been behind this organizing and this project since the very beginning. And we were able to get some support, significant support from them to pilot this year the Equity Center as one of their transformational projects in terms of impact for people around health equity. So that's been really, really wonderful. From the drop-in center side, and this ties to the deck side too, because a lot of those channels are flowing mutually. We, I think, have been able to do a lot of really, really incredible education and outreach about COVID and the pandemic. When you don't have access to technology or a TV or the news, it can be really hard to get plugged into what's going on. And so for some folks, the message board, the bulletin board at the drop-in center has been a kind of lifeline around just best practices, from washing your damn hands, to, hey, you could get a vaccine and do you want some more information about how to do that? And so lately we've been running, in partnership with a ton of great folks at the county and elsewhere, some vaccine clinics for unsheltered folks or sheltered people, but who are also extremely low income at the drop-in center. So that has been, to my mind, a really big success too. And, we're not in the business of mandating or pushing vaccines on people, but you better believe that I'm going to give you the opportunity if you want it and tell you all about why it might be a good fit for you. So that's been great. And I think also just in light of COVID, it's been wonderful to be part of communities that we're still and are going to continue to build important bridges, whether that's between like social service providers, people doing behavioral health on the ground, and then also in admin structures. And those bridges are important, not just because they're important, but also because in the end, people get better connected to what they need. That's how better services happen, more transparent conversation between providers. One of the beautiful things that came out of COVID was that there are these monthly service provider meetings, and they're not necessarily just Benton County, but it can be even broader. And there are some, of course, that are happening through OHA, Oregon Health Authority, some happening at the federal level, like you can plug in all kinds of ways. But there are some really distinct networks of providers who are constantly talking to each other now, and so much less siloed than they were before. Grant funding sharing, really creative, collaborative things happening. And COVID was an impetus for that, because people were like, holy shit, what are we doing? We need to have a conversation. And I think that will continue to be a best practice going forward. And it should have already been a structure in place, in the first place. So I don't know, that's been a really cool, I think, quote, success too.
How can people get involved or access the support that these centers offer? Obviously, with the drop-in center, it sounds like it's just a matter of being there in person, but... Yeah,
the drop-in center, we're there 9 to 12, open hours, 12 to 2 after hours by appointment, but we're pretty flex. So yeah, come. And there are free buses in Corvallis. If you are mobile in that way and you can bike or walk, we're down on 4th Street, right next to the taco shops. We have wonderful neighbors who are so great to be in community with too. So shout out to them. But that said, we also are part of a street outreach response team. And on Fridays, we're hoping to augment this, but on Friday mornings, volunteers actually go out. So we do direct outreach at the drop-in center in that people are coming to us, but we're also going to them. And so our SORT team members go out into places where people are rough camping. They touch base, they kind of find out what people need, bring them basic needs supplies, and then do direct connect to social supports in that moment too. So that's another way. If you're just out there and you see somebody with a SORT vest, you can say, hey, all right, you're a good person on my team. I need to ask you about X, Y, or Z. And the drop-in center is for absolutely anyone, unless you are an immediate harm to yourself or another person. We are the lowest barrier place in Corvallis and Benton County, so you are welcome to be there. I like to make that super clear to people. Yeah. The Equity Center is, we're hoping to maybe be able to start as life comes back a little bit, maybe do some pop-ups and just getting out there in the community a little bit more so that people can kind of know about us. Right now, it's been predominantly through stuff like this, word of mouth, hey, somebody at the school district who knows somebody, and just other providers telling their staff, the staff telling the folks that they're working with, the mutual aid networks that already existed and saying, okay, do you know about the DAC? Let's get plugged in there too. And that's a matter of, if you have email, being able to link up with us that way and find out what's happening in this virtual space. This is why I'm getting a little bit antsy around, is there a way that we can figure out a brick and mortar piece to this so that folks can have a physical location that is representative of this thing that we want to do, and actually just cruise in, roll in, walk in, crawl in, however you want to come in, right, to the space, and see if we can get you the supports that you need.
Do you have any personal stories you'd like to share around dealing with ableism, either specifically in Corvo or just a relevant experience related to your larger work?
Sure. I mean, I'll offer kind of a personal testimony because that seems like it makes sense. But so my relationship to disability and disability justice is founded in my own experience as being the child of someone with a significant disability. So my mom has epilepsy that has been progressive over the course of her life. So I have been doing care work since the beginning of time, and doing disability justice work without even knowing that that's what it was. Before this, we were kind of talking about you went to college and you were like, wait a minute, there's a whole world of information out here. And I had a similar experience where when I went to graduate school, I learned of disability studies as a field, and all of the kind of deep embodied knowledge that I had, I was oh shoot, there's language and systems that it was just a total eye-opener and gave me a new way to be in the world with this kind of embodied experience that I'd already had doing care work for my mom. But then so then I'm at Willamette, I'm, teaching disability studies 101, everything I teach is disability studies, and it's great. And I'm very much still, I think, I'm an ally. I was not identifying as a person with a disability. And then about 4 years ago, I came into chronic illness, and it was really, really scary and really hard, and, is now manageable. But it was another epiphanic moment where I was like, oh my gosh, all the things that I've been saying, it was the inverse, right? Of the thing before. Before I was I get this from the perspective of this is my mom and I do care work. And then I had the language. This was I was able to talk and explain and academicize. So I just made that word up. Right? Language is flexible that way. Yeah. But, and then all of a sudden I was oh my God, I know the things even more deeply in my soul now, because today is crushing. Today I will not, can I go to work ever again? All of those really real hard things. And so it also put a new perspective for me on this beautiful paradox that disability is. I think for me, but probably for a lot of people. I'm going to talk. I have a talk later this week that I'm going to discuss this. It's kind of my wheelhouse right now. I just finished a book and I was thinking a lot about this. But that beautiful paradox of like disability being so fucking hard, right? Like dealing with illness or impairment or like all just the shit of it, right? Mm-hmm. And it being like absolutely amazing. And this thing that, is core to who we are and shapes everything about the way that we build worlds, right, for ourselves and for others. And kind of holding those two things together simultaneously is so precious and incredible. And so I don't know that, 4 or 5 years ago, I sort of came back around to that. It was like, oh man, this is really, really bad at times, but am I trading it? No, because it's the shape of who I am, and sort of really coming into that fully has been a powerful journey lately. So
you make a great point. There is something very freeing in disability justice, for everyone, but it, really kind of, it's a new level of self-acceptance, when you are dealing with, especially something like chronic illness, where oftentimes you don't even know what you're dealing with until 4 or 5. For me, it took 10 years to get a diagnosis. And so it's a long time to be kind of, it's a whole other level of learning how to kind of love yourself and be patient with yourself. And also you gain a new kind of empathy towards people as a whole, right? It's like, I know I'm trying my best. I need to extend that to others because, again, as something that is invisible, like chronic illness, is just, it's that whole other layer of, like to your point, disability comes in a variety of forms.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's another, you said it even more beautifully, I think, but like that paradox also is so generative. And one of the things it generates is generosity, right? To others. Like if I'm going to extend, if I can love myself in that, right? I can do the same, right? I can hold that space for other people and people do that for me. And it's totally, totally affirming and amazing. And one other thing that you made me think of, Leo, that I just wanted to mention that is, I think, unique and sometimes challenging, but really awesome about the Disability Equity Center is that a lot of organizations that are serving folks with disabilities, and I understand completely why, are pretty kind of condition or impairment specific. So they're like, okay, if you, are an autist, here's your peeps. If you have IDDD, here are your peeps, right? You name it, right? So there's kind of these siloed service providers that are filling certain gaps and needs. But from the beginning of this project, one of the things that we were really interested in across diverse disability experience, what are the gifts that we can give to each other? So your experience, even though you say chronic illness and I say it too, we don't even know if we're saying the same thing necessarily. And so when you get folks together in spaces where their experiences and universes can collide, what are the generative possibilities there? And to have, let's say my friend with Downs be like, I love my Downs friends and my crew, but it's really nice to be in this room with all these other people, right, who have different other experiences of disability too. And so part of that decreasing the sort of social isolation as well is like bringing people into even more diverse, robust, equitable community.
The great thing about, to your point about like the larger community of like a variety of disabilities, is that you are able to help each other in ways that you wouldn't necessarily see before. Something I've navigated with one of my best friends who is also disabled is we work really well together in navigating social situations because she can do what I can't and vice versa. And so it's just a great way of, and we have like a whole other language of patience and understanding that, we need to be more careful with, how we spend our energy and more patient with each other and better at planning. And we have a whole other communication system that works so well for us and is such a cool thing that I don't have with my other best friends who I'm super close to, but who aren't disabled, right? So it's just it's such a cool, it's like a whole other language that's created. And it's just so great to be able to have that. So, it's easy to get focused in on our little bubbles. And so it's great to hear that, outside of my hometown, in Oregon as a whole, there are, other people doing the work and other people just looking to connect. And it's just a matter of kind of having these conversations. So that's great.
And I think, exactly. And the Equity Center, the Disability Equity Center, the goal is to have it be a much wider reach than than Corvallis and Benton. And I think that's totally possible. There are so few organizations like that, that are cross disability, that are focused on pride and culture, that are, and I think, that we can hopefully get some pretty broad geographical traction, especially if component pieces of this can happen in virtual space, which they will. I mean, we had run a few months or however many months ago, though I've lost time altogether, but we had been doing a sort of multi-piece on race and disability, intersections of race and disability, like an event. Yeah. And, my colleague who was in Ohio led it, so you don't have to be from Oregon even. So we'll see how it all shakes down. But no, I just appreciate this opportunity and thanks for finding me.
If you're interested in learning more about creating systems of support for those in your community, this episode's recommended book is Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next by Dean Spade. The link to purchase this book can be found in the episode description, or check it out and support your local library. Thanks again to Dr. Hobgood and Julie Chick for speaking with me. This has been Voices in Action, a podcast brought to you by EOSIL. Stay informed, stay safe, and remember, as Howard Zinn said, when we organize with one another, when we get involved, when we stand up and speak out together, we can create a power no government can suppress.